Finally. This has
Yeah.
been an absolutely crazy day for the New England Patriots. Evan Lazar, Alex Barth, Patriots Beat live edition free agency week. I was not expecting Alex to come on this podcast tonight with you and talk about this many signings for the Patriots. I thought we'd have a couple of things to talk about, but Marone, Bill Belichick went just haywire today. This was a full-on spending spree.
Bill Belichick unleashed.
And I said it before free agency started that we were going to get a bonanza, and I think a lot of people were hesitant because of Bill Belichick's past. You know, he's handed out big contracts before, but it's never been a buying spree like this, right? It's one guy here, it's Rosie Colvin or Dallas Thomas or Stephon Gilmore, but Bill Belichick signed 6 players today, if my count is correct, and I like to
so 6 new players.
Right.
And then they also re-signed Dietrich Wise and Carl Davis.
Correct.
So 8 contracts today total.
Yeah. Good point. So we're going to run through all the new additions. We obviously know a lot about Dietrich Wise and Carl Davis already. So we're going to run through all the new additions. We're also going to run through maybe some of the things that they might still have on the docket, because believe it or not, I don't think they're done yet, which I know is absolutely shocking to a lot of people.
No, they're not. I'd be shocked if they're done.
Yeah, so I don't think they're done yet. I don't believe, and I don't want to say that I'm 100% certain about this, but I don't believe that another massive move is coming. I think Judon and Jonnu were the 2 big signings that they were going after, but you never know. You know, if the market on Curtis Samuel, who I know they've had conversations with, is not as hot as it sounds like, then maybe they can get back in on that. But the 2 signings that they made tonight at wide receiver kind of suggest that maybe Curtis Samuel, Kenny Golladay, Corey Davis, those types of guys are out. But let's start with the 2 big ones and work our way down. Jonnu Smith, the first real big signing of free agency today, goes to the Patriots, the tight end. We argued about Jonnu versus Hunter Henry the other day. I'm going to pat myself on the back and say that Bill Belichick agreed with me as well. But what do you like about the Jonnu signing? Is there anything that worries you about the Jonnu signing?
Well, it's kind of the same answer to both. It's, how are they going to use him? And right. I think that for all the talk over the last year about Bill the GM, what Bill the GM did today was put the ball in Bill the coach's court, because a guy like Jonnu Smith, you're paying for upside. They made him, depending on how you look at it, 2nd or 3rd highest paid tight end in football. He's paid more than Darren Waller. He's paid more than Rob Gronkowski. We'll see what happens with Hunter Henry. This is a guy who's never had more than 500 receiving yards in a season. And you made him a top 3 tight end in the league. You don't do that unless you have a plan. Jonnu Smith can do a lot of things, and that's what's exciting, right? He can line up all over the formation. He can get open. He's great with the ball in his hands. How do they maximize that? That's up to the coaching staff, right? Are they going to rework parts of the offense and allow Jonnu Smith to do what Jonnu Smith does best? Or are they going to try to pigeonhole him into Rob Gronkowski's old role? Because if it's plan B, they should have signed Hunter Henry. So and I'm not saying they should have signed Hunter Henry. It's just Jonnu Smith is going to go, and this is going to scare some Patriots fans, but here's the reality. Jonnu Smith is going to go as far as Josh McDaniels lets him go.
Yeah.
And we won't know until, we get into camp in the preseason and we see what that role looks like. Again, you're paying for upside here. If they figure it out and they figure out a way to use him and all the little things he can do, right, he's going to, I think, live up to that contract. But if they just have him out there running up the seam every play, they signed the wrong guy and they paid him too much. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that I think that now...
And real quick, one more thing. Yeah. That's kind of the theme with all the signings today for me, is this is on Bill the coach now. They got guys who are going to go as far... They're good players, but whether they're good or they're great is going to be up to the coaches and how they scheme them. So if Bill the coach is the strength and Bill the GM is the weakness, then Bill the GM did a great job today putting it all on his coach.
Right, and I think that's a great point about Josh McDaniels and with Jonnu Smith, because there's a couple of different things that Jonnu Smith does really well. One of them is that vertical threat up the seam or over the middle of the field off of play action schemes and stuff like that. He can get up the field quickly, and then we also see when you're able to get him loose in the open field, he's a great ball carrier with the ball in his hands and creating after the catch. You can also throw it to him on screens. You can pass it off to him on end arounds or hand it off to him on an end around or a jet sweep. There's so many different things that you can do with this player. But I think the one thing that really stands out with Jonnu and his skill set is that he's got that ability finally to go above the rim and make a contested catch in traffic. And that's something that the Patriots were hoping they were going to get out of N'Keal Harry. We've seen it maybe once or twice in flashes out of N'Keal Harry. But over the last 2 years, they have not had a lot of guys that battle at the catch point like Jonnu Smith. So I think that's a really intriguing quality of his. Obviously, the red zone production is really good. 8 red zone touchdowns last year. That's something that they dearly missed, having that passing threat in the red zone. And again, it's that versatility too. He's a guy that can go up and get the ball in the red zone. I wouldn't necessarily throw a high point fade to him, but if you run him up the seam and try to back shoulder it or put it over the defender, he can go up and get it. The question really is how much do they tap into that scheme versatility? Because this is certainly a guy that can be an offensive weapon for them. I think that the player that Jonnu Smith could be, I'm not saying he is that now, but he could be someone like George Kittle, right? Who is used in so many different ways and is really a receiver in a tight end's body that can also block, right? He's a unique talent, and Jonnu has that athletic profile. I mentioned it in the piece that I wrote that he tested in the 93rd percentile in the combine a few years ago. This is a supreme athlete at the position, but now the onus is on the coaches to make sure that they tap into that. And I think the biggest thing that you mentioned about McDaniels and putting all the onus on the coaching staff, I saw that tweet by Mike Tranier today about how this is how you don't do it, right? This is not the playbook. This is not how you're supposed to do it in free agency. These spending sprees never work. But I think what you're noticing with the players that they are buying is that these guys are scheme fits. These are guys that fit what they do on both sides of the football. This is not just spending to spend. If they wanted to spend, they would have went out there and signed Kenny Golladay or Corey Davis or something like that and put a lot of money in the wide receiver position. No, instead they decided to get some system fits, some guys that are bigger ticket players, but certainly do things well that they want them to do. And I think it's going to be really exciting for Patriots fans to have something out of that tight end position finally, after we saw over the last 2 years such a dumpster fire there, that they are going to get something really good out of Jonnu Smith, who is 25 years old. I mentioned the athletic profile, and this is a player that every single year in Tennessee, his stats got better. Right. So what you're hoping for, and this is another element of what I really like about these moves for the Patriots, is that all these guys are going up. Right. For the most part, Matthew Judon might be sort of in his prime right now.
All guys coming off career years across the board.
Right. And Jonnu is certainly a guy that is on the upward trajectory. And I think that that's why they liked him over a lot of the other tight ends in the market, because Mike Giardi put that report out there that Jonnu Smith was their number one target in free agency. They really wanted to get this deal done. I think the main reason why was because he is only 25. And this is a player over the next 4 years that can get better as the Patriots get better. Right. And that's something I think that was really important to them. And I couldn't agree with you more, though, that now the onus is on Josh McDaniels to find all the because Jonnu Smith is your best offensive player now, in terms of skill players. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not offensive line. So he's going to be or should be your number one guy. And he should be the guy that gets the most touches. He should be the one that gets the most targets. And now it's going to be on Josh McDaniels to scheme up situations to do that. There are plays watching his tape earlier today from the Titans last year where they hand it to him. They bring him in motion. They bring him back in motion. They're handing it off to him on a jet sweep, a tight end, a 6'3", 250-pound tight end taking a jet sweep handoff. And he was good at it, right? And Arthur Smith found all of these different ways to get the ball in his hands in space and let him create with it. And there's, tight end screens, there's routes over the middle of the field that let him do that. But again, I think that this is a coup for the Patriots to get this player because they desperately needed something at that tight end position. They knew it. It was the biggest need that they had on the team, and they went out and they landed big. This is exactly what we were talking about when we said they had to come in at top of market day one and just blow a player away.
Say it. What was it?
Uncharacteristically aggressive. They were uncharacteristically aggressive.
I don't know how you didn't start the show with that. I mean, they absolutely were. And this is, to go back to that Mike Tranier tweet you mentioned earlier. Yeah. This, I don't totally disagree with him in that what was that Eagles team, the super team, right? That Vince Young, whatever. So it doesn't always work out. But like you mentioned, there's a rhyme and reason to most of these signings. Some of them are a little more questionable. Most of them, there's rhyme and reason. And I think that it's a shock to the system because the Patriots are doing it. But the reality is, for better or worse, the Patriots are now just like the other 31 teams. You don't do it this way when you have Tom Brady, because you have Tom Brady and you don't need to do it. You can buy low on guys. You can try to find reclamation projects. Most teams, how they have to operate when they go through a rebuild is spend big money, overpay to get guys in the building. You buy high on guys coming off career years, and that's what the Patriots did today. And that may sound like a negative to some people, but it's a positive because it tells, like last year, one of the biggest questions was, why is Bill Belichick still operating like he has Tom Brady when he doesn't? And now we know that Bill Belichick is that fog is gone. He's ready to operate within the realistic purview of his roster, and that he needs big ticket additions, and he went out and he got them. And that's good to see, because I think there was some doubt, right, whether or not that was going to happen. Now, the quarterback situation is still a huge question mark. We'll
the wide receiver position, he didn't exactly come out.
Yeah, so that one,
Agholor,
when I said,
we'll get to it.
Like most of the signings, we'll get to those. But, you know, Bill Belichick went out and spent. We didn't know if he could do it. He did it. That's a positive.
They're not done yet. So, you know, wide receiver could be addressed still in free agency. Maybe they're going to get a wide receiver one in the draft, and that's the path that they want to go down. Maybe they really like one of these guys. We don't know yet. You know, they could love Jalen Waddle, and we just don't know, right? So maybe they're going to go down that path. But let's move on to Matt Judon for a second. And I think when you look at, similar to Jonnu, who only had, I think, 470 yards and 8 touchdowns last year, the production doesn't pop at you with Matt Judon either. Only 6 sacks and 9 tackles for a loss for Baltimore last year, and he was playing under the franchise tag. And I remember talking to a lot of Ravens people during Ravens week saying that Judon just looks like a Patriot player, right? Looks like a Patriot edge defender, really stout guy at the line of scrimmage, can drop into coverage and play in space if you need him to, can rush the passer within the scheme, but not a flashy player, not somebody that has a double-digit sack season or anything like that. And a lot of people in Baltimore were disappointed by his season last year because he was being paid on the franchise tag and was not necessarily performing up to that franchise number. But the Patriots get him at a good number. It's 4 years, $56 million total value, and he just fits the mold to a T, right? A guy that can really set the edge, something that they desperately needed last year that they couldn't find anybody, whether it was John Simon or Chase Winovich or Anthony Jennings or Josh Uche, wherever they threw out there. Hey, they even tried Shalik Calhoun and Tayshawn Bauer out there, and they just couldn't set the edge of the defense to save their life. They're not going to have that problem anymore with Matt Judon. This is a guy that you can put over the tight end, and he is going to smash some bodies. And that's something that the Patriots desperately needed, even if it's not a sexy position in the defense where he's going to go and sack a guy 15 times. It's certainly something that plays well within their scheme. Like I mentioned, he's a very good scheme pass rusher too. Not necessarily this guy that's a bona fide one-on-one pass rusher, but he can certainly rush within the framework. He's a power rusher when he does go one-on-one, and then he's very good in stunts and different types of pressure schemes as well. So this is a very Patriot-like player, and they did pay top dollar, I think, for his market, not for the edge rusher market. I think that's important because the edge rusher market is pushing $20 million a year for the top guys. The Patriots get a really productive player within their scheme for almost half of that.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it's the scheme thing, right? Like I said with Jonnu Smith, this is a guy, it's not a bad thing. He can line up all over the defense, left side, right side, hand in the ground, standing up. Like there's a lot of different ways they can move him around. It's now on the coaching staff and Bill Belichick to figure out the best role for him with all that versatility and put him in a spot where they maximize that value. And maybe it's just, one spot and that's where he stays. Maybe it's moving him all over the place. We'll see. Do they have him and Josh Uche on the field at the same time on opposite sides? Are those guys spelling each other with Chase Winovich opposite them? Like there's a lot of questions here. And that's, like I said with Smith, it's kind of the same thing. How they got a guy who they can use in a bunch of different ways. And that's good. Whether it's a good signing or a great signing comes down to how they ultimately use him. And it's now on Bill, the coach, to figure out how to maximize that. We'll see what happens. Again, they paid him a ton of money, right? He told Josina Anderson when she asked, why did he choose the Patriots? They chose me. The video of him with his kid, it didn't seem, super thrilled about New England. I'm sure he's had a long couple days. I'm sure he's tired. I don't want to hold that against him. Let's kind of see what that motor looks like when he gets in and where he's playing exactly. But he was one of their better signings. If I had to rank pound for pound, so not best players, but You factor in the player, the money, the duration, the fit, all of it. I have him as their second best signing today. And for the record, I have Jonnu Smith third. We'll get to who I think their first is. It's a bit of a sleeper, but there's nothing, we might look back on this in 4 years. Oh, was it the best signing Bill ever made? We might look back in 4 years and say it was terrible, but I think at the time he made the signing, this was the right deal to do. You can't help but like the deal in the moment.
I was pretty surprised by this deal because the Patriots and Bill Belichick in the past have shied away from paying edge rushers, right? Kyle Van Noy gets paid by Miami. Chandler Jones gets traded to Arizona and then paid by the Cardinals. It's not typically their brand to go out there and pay a guy $12.5 million to rush the passer. It's not really what they do. But I think with Judon, what they see is someone that is extremely versatile. And you mentioned where he's going to play in the defense. I think he's playing strong side edge day one, and they're going to put him over the tight end and on the strength of the formation, and they're going to have a strong side. I think that's going to have Judon and Dante Hightower over there, and all of a sudden getting outside the defense is going to be a whole lot harder than it was last year. And when at this Patriot defense, every single time you talk to a defensive player, you hear no edge, no chance. Bill Belichick's mantra, every single time you hear him out at training camp practices, he's yelling, set the edge, set the edge, set the edge, right? That's such an important element of the entire scheme because this is a two-gapping front. They're not penetrating at the line of scrimmage. They want to feed everybody back into the middle to those big nose tackles, those big DTs, the linebackers, Juwan Bentley, Dante Hightower. They don't want those guys running sideline to sideline at the second level. They want it all to be played in a phone booth. Well, if you can't set the edge of the line of scrimmage, then you're not playing in a phone booth. You're going to be playing out on the perimeter, which is exactly where the Patriots don't want to be. So Matthew Judon goes to the strong side edge spot right over the tight end and the tackle, and he's going to be able to slam you right there on the end. And that's something that I think that the Patriots are really optimistic about with him. And the other element of it too is that in Baltimore, they run a very exotic front, a very exotic defense, just like the Patriots. It's not exactly one for one. It's not totally the same, but it's a very similar scheme in what they ask those players to do at that position. They're going to ask them to rush, they're going to ask them to set the edge, and they're going to ask them to occasionally drop into coverage. He had about 109 coverage snaps, I think it was, or 107, something like that last year, where he's just dropping off the edge into flat zones and stuff like that and taking running backs on little peel outs and things. Nothing too exotic, but those are the things that the Patriots want their edges to do. Those are the things Baltimore wants as their edge to do. So they're going to be able to just say to Matthew Judon, just come in and do the same exact thing that you did for Baltimore, right? That's all you have to do. So just a quick...
I was just going to say, it's kind of, I talked about Bud Dupree last week as, potentially that guy. I think this is essentially, what I thought they would do with Dupree, just a different player. But you're right. The coverage element of this, I think, is a little underrated because I remember Trey Flowers was a guy that they kept trying to drift back into coverage and he could never quite get it. And it cost them at times. Not that Trey Flowers was a bad player. It's just that wasn't what he did. Judon having that experience, I think, is ultimately going to end up going a long way.
Yeah, so this is a player more in the mold of a Van Noy or a Rob Ninkovich even, or a Vrabel, those types of guys that were able to play basically anywhere on the line of scrimmage and handle multiple roles. And again, it's just going to be as easy as do exactly what you did in Baltimore, just bring that energy here, and we're going to have a role for you very early on. And I just think it's really interesting because I mentioned that Bill Belichick doesn't usually pay for that position. He also drafted 3 edge rushers in the last 2 drafts, right? You get Uche, Jennings, and Winovich, and the Patriots still identified that as a major hole in their defense last year, and they go out and they sign Judon to fill that hole, and I think he's going to step in day one, plug-and-play type of starter, and that's why the money was what the money was. The quick update I wanted to just mention is Corey Davis just signed a contract with the New York Jets. Not that we really expected after all the flurry of moves today from the Patriots.
Well,
he was going to come here. You never know. But Davis off the board for New England at wide receiver. The next signing of the day was Davon Godchaux from the Miami Dolphins. And this is one of those sneaky low-key signings by Bill Belichick. Is this your number one? Because
This is actually, yes. This was my favorite signing of the day. I think that they get, a good underrated player. They get him for, a great cost. I think that they probably underpaid for him, and he's got that versatility. He can play along the defensive line, especially, as some people have hinted, they might flip back to a 3-4 next year based on their signings today. He strikes me as the kind of guy that can come in and make a difference in New England. He's going to be reliable, versatile, and can have a role on this team for 3, 4, 5 years, right? He's only 25. Kind of not a Lawrence Guy type of player, but a Lawrence Guy kind of signing.
Yeah.
Alan Branch, just one of those guys that's never flashy. You're not going to see a ton of his jersey around Gillette Stadium, but can come in and make a difference for half a decade. This was pound for pound my favorite signing they made today.
I'm not surprised, and I actually think that his jersey might not be around Gillette Stadium, but the fans that are watching us right now that understand the real
people who know, yes,
are going to recognize how big of a difference a guy like Godchaux can make versus what they had in the interior last year and how many issues they had stopping the run. Remember, this was a team that ranked 32nd in DVOA against the run last year, dead last, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL, if not the worst run defense in the NFL, and their two big defensive signings are Judon and Godchaux, and there's no mistaking why that was, right? They got two guys that are stout, powerful guys at the point of attack and can play the run extremely well. And Godchaux is also somebody that I think when you watch it, the Miami Dolphins defense last year, he just flashes, right? And you're just you're watching it for all these other guys, for Brian Flores' scheme. You're trying to figure out where exactly everything's going. And there's this guy in the middle of the D that's just continuously resetting the line of scrimmage. And he's someone that really fires off the ball quickly and has great upper body power, and you see him jolt guys back all the time, but he plays well within the structure too, and he's going to be able to hold up in a gap. He's got the length, and he's got that first step ability to be able to two gap and hold the point of attack and reset the line. He also has a little bit of lateral mobility, so if you line him up like over the guard or outside the guard in the B gap, he does have that ability to cross face and jump inside of guys and things like that. So certainly someone that when you watch the Dolphins, you say, okay, this he's pretty good, right? And then also similarly to Judon, but even more so with Godchaux, he just is coming from Brian Flores' defense. It's the same defense, right? In terms of terminology and techniques. So it's going to be a really easy transition for him to go from the Miami defense up here to New England. He's going to totally understand what they're doing on day one from a philosophical standpoint and from a terminology standpoint. So there shouldn't be too much of a transition at all there for Godchaux. And I think that this is definitely one of the, I mean, personally, I like Jonnu the best just because that was the player that I really wanted them to go after to begin with. But Godchaux is certainly someone that I felt like once they signed him, I was like, oh, we should have talked about that guy when we talked about defensive players, because he's just
I had that same thought. It's funny.
Yeah, he's just one of those dudes. All right, let's move on to Jalen Mills, because this one shocked me. I mean, I think Jalen Mills can be a productive player if used correctly. I don't know what his best role is. He played a little bit corner. He played a little bit at safety. When he played corner for the Eagles a few years ago, he was one of the worst starting cornerbacks in the NFL. He got burned consistently on the outside, and they moved him towards the middle of the field, more of like a slot box, free safety type guy, play all three safety roles at different times. And he's just a jack of all trades, but I'm not necessarily sure if he does one thing particularly well. Out of all the signings, this one I could have done without. You know, I probably would have rather them spend this money elsewhere. But clearly, you know, I give Bill the benefit of the doubt that he obviously could know something that we don't about Jalen Mills.
Yeah, Jalen Mills to me, I'm sorry, I'm just updating with the Corey Davis signing here in the background if you see me off to the side. Jalen Mills to me, it's another one where, okay, there's some talent there. How do the coaches use him? It's up to the coaches to maximize it. I don't think he's an outside corner. I saw some people throw out that, you know, this puts Gilmore on the hot seat. No, it puts Jason McCourty on the hot seat, maybe a little bit. He really struggled there in 2018 and 2019 as a corner for the Eagles. I mean, it got ugly at times after an encouraging start to his career. They move him to safety last year. He signs a 1-year prove-it deal, and he kind of picked it up. I look at him, and I've talked about wanting a guy for this role pretty much all offseason, right? The new Duron Harmon, the deep safety who plays next to Devin McCourty. Now, he can play that role, or he can play in the box, and then Kyle Duggar goes back and plays that role. And it's probably not 100% of either, right? You probably have guys doing a little bit of both, but he just gives them, I think he's a better version of what they ultimately wanted Terrence Brooks to be. Remember when they signed him and we talked about, oh, he can play deep safety, he can play box safety, he can play slot corner, he can play special teams. And then, I mean, Terrence Brooks was a fine player, but he never played more than 25% of the snaps during his tenure in New England. This is a guy who has that same versatility, who, if he can play at the level he did last year, you're comfortable putting out there a little bit closer to 50% of the time. So, this is a guy, again, you're buying upside, you're buying versatility, just like with Smith, just like with Judon. And we'll see where they go from there. Does he eventually become a guy who can step in and replace Devin McCourty, replace Patrick Chung, maybe in the box where he played most of his snaps? I look at him more of a safety as a corner, but he's going to be able to help them in the slot, which is big. We'll see what this means for Juwan Williams going forward. But I actually like this signing. It's not a ton of money, right? $24 million over 4 years guaranteed. That number probably comes down specifically. I'm going to guess it's a pretty big incentive contract. I didn't see actually the details. Might have been out on that. $9 million
guaranteed, so it's not a terrible.
So yeah,
they're committing to him for 1 year basically.
This is the kind of contract Patriots used to sign. It's a guy with a ton of versatility, high upside, who's changed positions, who we'll see what the coaching staff gets out of him. But no, I really like this sign. And the other thing about Jalen Mills, right? Even when he struggled, Eagles fans loved him and he loved that team. He is a guy that puts it on for the city. He's not afraid to hit. He's not afraid to tackle. He's not afraid to, get in a teammate's face, whether it's encouragement, whether it's, hey, you got to pick it up. Like, he's a guy who's going to be a leader. They need that. They need those character guys. And he's definitely one of those. He is a tone setter on defense. They have guys like that. Don't get me wrong. Donta Hightower, Devin McCourty, Patrick Chung, but this is going to be a defensive first team. You want your defense to have an edge. You want your defense to have both literally and figuratively, you want your defense to have an edge. You want them to have an attitude. Jalen Mills is going to give them an attitude on defense. What he brings schematically, that's the question. But mentally, he's got everything. I just don't know where
he plays because of Jonathan Jones, who's one of the better slot corners.
Isn't that kind of the point?
You have Chung, you have Duggar, you have Phillips, you have McCourty, Devin, obviously. Where does he play in the defense? And for that money, they obviously have a plan for him, right? Because they're not just bringing this guy in at $9 million guaranteed to have him sit on the bench like Terrence Brooks did. No offense to Terrence Brooks. He's a great guy, great, good Patriot, but that's not what they're paying Jalen Mills like. So if they are paying Jalen Mills a couple $1 million to come here and fill in the Terrence Brooks role because they knew they were losing Brooks in free agency, that's one thing, but that's not what they're doing here. They're doing.
So I think he's better than Brooks. It's more than Brooks. Right. I think to borrow from another sport, right? The Red Sox went out, they signed Kike Hernandez and Marwin Gonzalez, and these are guys who play 7 of the 9 positions. And there's not an obvious spot where they're going to put them, but it's kind of it's a matchup thing. Oh, we need, a lefty bat. We're going to put this guy here today. Oh, so-and-so's in a slump. We're going to throw Marwin Gonzalez at second base or in left field for 3 or 4 days. So, when it's facing a tight end, maybe he plays more box safety. When it's facing a team that likes to go deep, maybe you see him at strong safety. I don't think there's a role for him. I think the idea is he is a true matchup player, chess piece, kind of like what Duggar was last year. I think he's somebody to spell Duggar and make it so Jason McCourty and Jonathan Jones don't, if McCourty comes back, don't have to play as much safety as they did last year. Remember, those guys played like a lot of safety last year. They weren't horrible at it, but you don't want them out of position. I think it's just somebody to spell Duggar and give them another option at safety that they can use strategically based on their opponent.
I think the writing's on the wall with this move with Jason McCourty. I think they wanted a guy that had a little bit more safety experience.
Yeah. Well, I would say Jason McCourty and maybe Juwan Williams to an extent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what they look at, and I'm hopeful that this is actually going to happen, is that the league, a lot of teams, a lot of defenses, especially the good ones, are starting to go more towards split safety coverages, quarters defenses, cover 2 structures, because of all the different air raid concepts that are coming up from the college ranks into the NFL. You got to play with 2 deep safeties, right? You're not going to play Kansas City with a post-high safety. The Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, these guys are going to run right through them, right? So that's what they've been doing. That's what Tampa Bay did in the Super Bowl, is play a lot of 2 deep. And if you're going to play 2 deep, then you have to have a second free safety that can do that. Or, it would technically be a strong safety, but you get my drift. And I think that Jalen Mills is a guy that had a little bit more experience in that sort of role. He played a little bit more free safety, a little bit more deep than maybe a Jason McCourty or Jonathan Jones have in the past. So they have their tight end stoppers and Duggar and Patrick Chung and Adrian Phillips coming back. And I think that they also think that Jalen Mills can play a little bit more deep safety in that Deron Harmon role that you mentioned. And this is a converted cornerback. They love to do that. They love to take corners and turn them into safeties because they have great cover skills. They understand the game from both perspectives. They have usually very good ball skills that are maybe better than traditional safeties. So Eagles fans, when they saw this move, were like, what is Bill Belichick getting on Jalen Mills for? Especially on day one of free agency. What's he up to? So I'm really fascinated to see what he's up to with Jalen Mills, because he clearly has a role in mind for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given him that contract. So I'm really fascinated to see what they're going to do with him in the defense. But at some point, Bill Belichick is going to want one of those coverage rotations where everybody moves after the snap, right? You can just turn the whole thing like a dial because everybody's going to have experience in all those different spots. Jalen Mills is one of those guys that has so much positional versatility that if they want to do some exotic stuff after the snap to confuse quarterbacks, now they have another one of those guys that can do different things and can make different drops and play in different spots in the defense in the secondary. And I think that that's an interesting element to it as well. Let's move on to these two wide receivers. I think on one hand, Nelson Agholor and Kendrick Bourne both have reasons why we can talk ourselves into it. Certainly Agholor, for the most part, I think is a good signing. My question is, what's next, right? What's the next shoe to drop? Because I don't think Jonnu Smith is a great player, but I don't know if he's truly can be the top guy on the totem pole in your offense, right? Like, I think you still need somebody else there. So I'm very interested to see what else they have in store at the wide receiver position. But let's start with Agholor, who last year for the Raiders played a lot of Z receiver, where he was playing both inside and outside the formation. And he is somebody that averaged almost 19 yards per catch last year. He's second in the league in yards per catch. So he really developed into a vertical threat for Vegas. Whereas with the Eagles, he was more of a slot receiver, winning between the numbers, winning on stuff over the middle of the field, very different roles. So he has that outside versatility. The comparison that I threw out there was like Chris Hogan with more upside, somebody that can play and run from different alignments. I think he's a really nice complementary weapon, a really nice signing for that role. Do I think he's a number one wide receiver? Probably not, but the Patriots might be thinking we're spreading the ball around, everybody's going to touch it, and Nelson Agholor can be a productive receiver within an offense, right? He wasn't last year with the Raiders, and obviously the 2017 Eagles offense, he was a big part of that too, and they won a Super Bowl on the back of that offense. So certainly has some things to like about him, but probably, in my mind, he's probably more of a complementary weapon than a true number one type of guy.
Right. So we talked about this pretty much since this show started, 3 months ago, is that, do you want the number one guy and then just bring back everybody else behind him? Or do you want to bring in assets, multiple assets, and be able to spread the defense out with like true NFL options? You're not throwing a Dante Moncrief on the outside. I think when we talked about that plan, we both had the idea that they'd shoot a little higher than Nelson Agholor and Kendrick Bourne. These are capable NFL wide receivers. So you have that. They probably paid a little too much, especially on Agholor. $11 million per year for that guy, like you said, is not a true number one receiver. Maybe there's another shoe to drop, but the way they were spending money today, I wonder, if they wanted Juju, if they wanted Kenny Golladay, if they wanted Marvin Jones, whoever, that guy's probably here. They were offering money where it's the deal's here, you take it. They weren't offering deals.
I mean, it's not the total value of the contract, but Nelson Agholor signed a 2-year, $26 million deal. That's no small deal.
But I think it was 22 guaranteed, wasn't it?
It was a lot of money. It's a lot of money for the player. I thought that he was going to be around $8 million a year. This is pushing $11, $12 million a year with an incentives package. So they paid Nelson Agholor, and I agree with you 100% that I think the Patriots were moving on the top of the wide receiver market. It didn't break their way, so they scooped up Agholor and Bourne because those were the two secondary tier guys that they really liked, and now we're here. So my guess is that I know they were in on Curtis Samuel in the beginning, and they probably got out on Curtis Samuel quickly, and that's kind of what happened. And they sort of veered it, instead of waiting around to see Kenny Galladay's decision, to see Corey Davis's decision, to see Curtis Samuel, Juju, all those guys decide. They just pounced on their tier 2 guys instead to make sure that they got something out of it at that position.
So I think it's I think it's worth noting they did bring in Jonnu Smith. He's your number one receiver now, right? So I still think they need to make another move, and maybe it's the draft. maybe there's somebody they really like in the draft. I just don't know. Some of it is how do these guys fit? I think we know how Agholor fits, right? He's the speed guy. He's going to replace Damiere Byrd. That's an upgrade. They may have paid too much to upgrade, but that's the upgrade. He's your outside speed receiver. Kendrick Bourne, to me, is more of the question. He's very, very similar to Jakobi Meyers. And are you going to have two of those guys out there on the field? Because you're pretty slow, even with Agholor at that point. So, if you have those two guys out there and they still don't have a pass-catching running back under contract right now, okay, so you have Agholor and Smith, and then, then what? So there was the report earlier in the day that they were talking to running backs. The running backs didn't like what they heard. They were looking elsewhere, but I'm still going to pay a lot of attention to that. And then they need to do something else at wide receiver here. These are two, if they go out and they get Juju and they get Kenny Golladay, we're in business. Let's go. You got, and then Nelson Agholor is like a legit number 2. You have Myers and Bourne kind of, playing off each other at the 3. And now we're talking. Now you have an offense. I don't know that this is enough. The signings independently are probably okay because, again, they needed those complementary pieces. But with how much they paid them, did they hamstring themselves in, well, now what else can they do? Because they need to do more at the position. Right. And they need to do more on the offense. They still need to bring back David Andrews, and they still need to sign at least one running back.
So the way I feel about it is that I think the Patriots are more or less, I don't think they're done adding wide receivers in free agency, but I think they've bowed out of the top of the market, right?
That's what I'm saying. But at this point, what does adding another guy from this tier, what does that do?
I don't know, but I think that their attention to me right now is turning to their own free agents. Guys like David Andrews, Adam Butler is still a free agent who hasn't signed yet. Lawrence Guy still hasn't signed anywhere yet. Those guys were not necessarily expected to go day one free agency, but I don't think that Kendrick Bourne was expected to sign day one free agency either. So maybe they do kind of go back and pay some of their own guys. Maybe they try to make something work with James White, or they try to make something work with Rex Burkhead to get those two guys back, or one of those two guys back. I want to talk about Bourne for a second because last year was a bad year for him with the San Francisco 49ers. He didn't play particularly well, but I think that he's the type of guy that has a lot of skills. And I remember looking at him a couple years ago when they made their Super Bowl run in San Francisco. And although he's only 6'1", that actually took me by surprise. I thought he was a little bit taller. He kind of plays like a tight end. He's a guy that's a bigger guy that runs the middle of the field. That's, more of an inside receiver, certainly somebody that wins on more of an inside horizontal plane, post, dig, slant, that type of route tree. And he's got some girth and he's got some ability to go over the middle. He's a tough guy. And he's also pretty good at blocking. And that's what they look for. It's not something that we necessarily care about, but those are some of the traits that they look for. They want toughness. They want guys that are willing to go over the middle. They want guys that are willing to block. And Kendrick Bourne's one of those types of guys. Now, is he as good as some of these other guys? Probably not. But I think they're going to look at Kendrick Bourne. They're going to look at Corey Davis, and they're going to probably say, Davis is not really that type of mentality, right? He's not necessarily that type of tough. He's not necessarily that guy that, wants to be the number one. He wants to be the stud. Not that Bourne is, but if you're going to pay Davis that kind of money that the Jets just paid him, you want that type of guy out of him. And what I am hesitant on with the moves that they've made at wide receiver is that at all these other positions, especially edge defender and tight end, obviously with Judon and Smith, they went uncharacteristically aggressive, right? They went outside their usual mold to pay for those guys. This feels like more of the same at wide receiver, right? This feels like more of their same kind of stuff. And
the one thing I'll say in defense of the receiver moves, as everybody in the chat tells me being too negative, the one thing I'll say in the defense of the receiver moves is I don't think you can look at those moves alone in context. You have to include the Jonnu Smith move in that. And they did go out and they got one of the top pass catchers on the market. Now, he plays tight end, not wide receiver, but they did. I still don't think they did enough at wide receiver, but I wouldn't quite say it's the same old, because they also don't sign Jonnu Smith back in the day either.
That's fair. I guess they probably look at it, and we do have some breaking news, another Patriots sign that I want to get to here in a second. But
wait,
I think
what? Seriously?
Yeah, but they do sort of maybe look at Jonnu Smith as more of an offensive weapon than a tight end, right? A guy that can really lead your offense. So maybe that's the way that they look at it, and they look at him as the true number one in their offense. Jacoby Myers, Nelson Agholor, Kendrick Bourne, these guys fill in. I think they still are hopeful to move N'Keal Harry into trade, but if not, they're going to try to get the most out of that player next year, obviously. But I want to break in with this breaking news. The Patriots have signed Henry Anderson, who was released by the Jets earlier last week, and this is not a surprise to me at all. So now the Patriots add Davon Godchaux and Henry Anderson. The Patriots won't rework their defensive line. Besides Dietrich Wise and Carl Davis, who I think are going to be low money signings, certainly Davis, the Patriots looked at Lawrence Guy. They looked at Adam Butler. They said not good enough last year. And as much as we like those guys as players, like covering them as a reporter, that's the way that the team is operating, is that they really felt like they had to get better at that spot. Henry Anderson is your typical 3-4 defensive end, a strong guy, can definitely hold up at the point of attack. He's got good size, good leverage, good power. He's your typical Patriot 3-4 end. He's not going to come off the ball quickly. He's not going to put up 11, 12, 13 sacks next year, but he's going to get the job done, and he's going to be serviceable in that spot. He reminds me a little bit of Lawrence Guy. Now, they thought Lawrence Guy was going to play more inside. He ended up playing more, kind of 5 technique over the tackle. I think that's exactly where they'll end up putting Henry Anderson. So it's Henry Anderson on a 2-year deal to the Patriots. That's the latest signing as we just continue this whirlwind of signing for the Patriots today. But how do you feel about Anderson, and do you feel like this moves the needle at all?
I mean, I think it's just, I'm not, wow. I haven't been wow outside it probably after the first. I haven't been wow on any of these. It's just, it kind of has to sink in a little bit because, right, we're so not used to the Patriots having this strategy.
Right.
I like that they're putting an emphasis on the defensive front. I really do. You mentioned the struggles against the run last year. Yeah. You can't have that, especially this is going to be a team that wins low-scoring games. I wrote this last March, and I think the trend has continued that Bill Belichick is basically picking up where he left off before Tom Brady showed up in 2001. And the teams he was building when he first got to New England in 2001, modern NFL spread offense, high-scoring games, be damned. He is building a team that is trying to win every game 20-6. They're building up the defense. They're building up the run game, the power run game, and they are just going to try to beat the crap out of all their opponents. They're just going to try to, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Give me more smash mouth football, but you can't do that. You can't do that if you don't have a team that can't dominate the trenches. So the more big bodies you bring in that defensive front on the offensive line, the better off this team is going to be suited to dictate games and play games the way they want to play them. So any signing where you get a starting caliber defensive lineman, I mean, we'll see the money, right? Maybe they gave him $50 million and this sucks. But in theory, adding Henry, this is a good deal. They're building a team. I think last year at times, right, and you can disagree with me on this, I don't think the Patriots were totally sure of their identity, and I think that hurt them at times. They were trying to do a bunch of things they couldn't really do. This team has an identity, and they're going to be able to stick to it, and that is smash mouth football.
Yeah, and I think Henry Anderson's the type of typical Patriots signing, right?
2-year deal, so we don't have the money, but it's a 2-year deal.
So this isn't Judon, this isn't Jonnu, this isn't one of these big splash signings. This is a pretty typical Belichick, just a system fit, a guy that's on the cheaper side. But I'm actually really surprised, not surprised given the year that they had last year, but they clearly identified that the defensive line was not good enough last year, right? They clearly said to themselves, the defensive line was a big part of the reason why we were dead last in DVOA against the run. And we don't want to do that again this year. And Godchaux and Henry Anderson are two guys that I think are very similar to players that they had on the team last year. I think Godchaux's a little bit like Bo Allen, who never played for the Patriots, but the theory of Bo Allen, right? What they thought they were getting with Bo Allen. And then Henry Anderson's a lot like a guy like Lawrence Guy. And I think that they sort of felt like those guys, Bo obviously never got on the field, and Henry Anderson and Lawrence Guy, I thought that they were higher on Guy than they ended up being. But they clearly felt like he had a bad year too, and kind of threw them in that kind of group of that defensive line that struggled. So here we go. I mean, I think that they're completely reworking it. They're reworking the defensive line, maybe even more so than they're reworking the wide receiver position at this point of free agency.
But again, if you're going to be a team that's just trying to punch your opponent in the mouth for 60 minutes, which are you going to focus more on?
Yeah, and I think it's fun. That element of it's fun to me because
it's team building. It absolutely is. And
they were such a weak team up front last year on defense, right? That was that front just got ran over week in and week out. And as much as we talk about throwing the football and how important it is to pass the ball, and that's what really gets you going and all that kind of stuff, all of that's definitely true. But the easiest way to move the ball from point A to point B is to run it down somebody's throat. And if you can continue to run it down a team's throat, then nothing else matters at that point. If you're a defense or you're an offense, right? You're just going to be ran on every single week. It's really difficult to stop them. So I think that that's a big part of this, is that the Patriots really needed to shore up that run defense. It must have just driven Bill Belichick crazy how terrible they were last year against the run. So they go out and they sign two guys that are run-stuffing defensive linemen. Judon, certainly a guy that can really set the edges, very powerful, and plays the run extremely well. And they kind of went away from looking at guys at the second level of the defense, or maybe spending big on wide receivers so they could kind of spread some of this money around to the defensive line and to the linebackers on the line of scrimmage. So Patriots, Henry Anderson, 2-year deal. Another one, that's 9 acquisitions today, or 9 transactions today, I should say.
Yeah, I'm losing. I mean, that's a fifth of the roster, assuming everybody they signed today makes the team. And I don't think there's any. I mean, maybe Carl Davis won't, but I think everybody else they signed, right? There's no reason they shouldn't make the team.
Yeah,
that's a fifth of the roster This is a rebuild. This New England, you're witnessing a rebuild. That's what this is.
This is a rebuild.
It's quicker. It's an expedited rebuild, but this is a rebuild.
So the cool part about it is, Alex, is I think we talked about this a lot, right? Of setting up whoever the next quarterback is going to be. And we can talk about Cam being the quarterback maybe for next year and how this kind of impacts him. But that next quarterback, you wanted him to be dropped into a good situation, right? And dropping him into the offense that they had last year was not going to be dropping them into a good situation. So now I kind of feel like, wow, if they are able to draft one of these quarterbacks in the first round, whether it's Mac Jones or Trey Lance or Justin Fields or Zach Wilson or whoever it ends up being, that quarterback's got a chance now, right? They have some guys, especially with Jonnu, that they can actually put that quarterback in a pretty good situation. And now their defense is starting to be retooled a little bit too. So the defense is going to be better than it was last year. I mean, I feel a lot better about putting that quarterback, if it's a rookie, not saying he's going to necessarily start right away next year, but just the outlook of the team moving forward with a young quarterback. It definitely makes a lot more sense and fits a lot more if that's the path that they end up going down, because now that guy's got some weapons. Now he's got some things to work with. It's exciting.
Well, he kind of has right? We talked about with the receivers. He kind of has everything but the guys to work with. He has Jonnu Smith and an overpaid Nelson Agholor. But no, I mean, you're right though. I mean, this is
definitely
better. Yeah, and I see people saying like you don't want to rebuild, like they need. So you want the same team as last year? I mean, nobody wants to rebuild. You want to be 12-4 and competing for a Super Bowl every single year. That doesn't happen. It's a unicorn. The fact that Patriots did that is so beyond expectations. You'd rather this than be the Jaguars, who are constantly going 4-12 and Bill is not screwing around. He's not going to wait. Now, like you're saying, the question is the quarterback, but the good news is whether it's a rookie this year, whether it's a rookie next year, right? We've talked about that if they don't love any of the quarterbacks in this draft, it's not sexy, but you sit it out. You make sure the rest of your roster is locked up golden, and then you move up into the top 5 next year. You get the quarterback, and you go for it.
They're doing it, right?
And by the way, if the people say you don't want to do that, that's what the Chiefs did. Right, they were like right there. Alex Smith was borderline, and the Patriots don't have an Alex Smith, but they were right there. They added Mahomes, and boom, wagon. It kind of feels like that could be what the Patriots are trying to do.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap this up, I think today proved 2 things very, very much so. Number one, if you pay him enough, people still want to come to New England. All this talk of how are the Patriots going to draw guys without Tom Brady, and are they going to draw receivers here without Brady, and who's going to be throwing them the football, and all this worry about the quarterback position. And I don't think that Jonnu Smith signed here because Cam Newton signed back here a couple of days ago, right? Jonnu Smith signed here because they offered him $12.5 million to sign here. And Judon said that exact same thing, that the Patriots called him, offered him a ton of money, and he said yes, right? So at the end of the day, money really talks. I think Bill Belichick really talks too. And I think all this conversation that we had before free agency about can the Patriots still attract free agents? Who's going to want to play here? All this kind of stuff, that all went out the door this morning. I think we proved, it might take some more money than it usually does, but they can definitely still attract free agents here.
So I guess now the question becomes, if we're going to wrap this up here, I would say we get into, what are you expecting tomorrow? What's the next move? Do they stay aggressive? I said it before, I'm looking for another wide receiver, but I really want to see what they do at running back. And we know they're looking.
Why do you want a running back so bad? Please explain.
Who's their third down back right now?
Who is their third down back? They could draft sixth round and do that role, Alex.
But can they? They have the money. There's good options out there. Look, whether you want it or not, it sounds like they're trying to make it happen. We know they're talking to running backs. We know that they're in on some of these guys. You have Jamal Williams out there who would be a great fit. You have Duke Johnson. The guy is there. I don't know if it's going to take a ton of money. Maybe it's a 1-year deal. It's not a bad short-term investment. You get that next guy ready. Or maybe it's James White. Re-signing James White wouldn't be a bad option. If
the Patriots are going to spend money on a running back, you have to tell me that Bill Belichick truly feels that James White is washed.
But do they have to? Well, I'm saying maybe it is James White. Then he's a pending free agent. He doesn't have a contract.
Right. Just
paying a free agent and paying a running back. I'm not saying they have to go out and give somebody the ridiculous contract Aaron Jones got. 1 year, $5, $6, $7 million. Just get a guy in as that bridge third down running back while you figure out if it's JJ Taylor or if it's a draft pick or whatever. They need to add a running back. Their only running backs under contract right now are Sony Michel, Damian Harris, and JJ Taylor. Whether it's in the draft, whether it's in free agency, doesn't have to be tomorrow. But they're going to add a running back at some point.
Why did they carry J.J. Taylor on the roster all year last year? And I don't know if J.J. Taylor is the answer, because I have some worries, especially as a third down running back, about his size, right? Because first of all, is he going to be able to pick up a blitz, or is he just going to get run over every single time they put him in that spot?
Right. So that's what I'm telling you. They have to add somebody at some point. I'm not saying they should spend a ton of money, but they're talking to running backs. It's clearly on the radar.
The other question,
is it unfair to wonder how that develops tomorrow?
No. I think the other question is, though, if Cam is if their plan is Cam, right, and their plan is not necessarily a rookie, like maybe they draft Kellen Mond or they draft the guy from Stanford, Davis Mills, or something like that in the mid rounds, and they kind of work with that guy like they've worked with Stidham. Maybe that's the path they're going down. If that's the path they're going down, then I don't think the check down running back is really a big.
That's fair. If they're going to punt on the quarterback this year, that's fair.
Okay, but I definitely agree with you that they have been in the quarterback or the running back market. Excuse me. All these reports are out there that they came in hard at some of the top running backs. You might have actually gotten your wish, and then if Aaron Jones had hit free agency, he might have been a Patriot, right? I mean, that might have been a guy that they really went after. I just don't know. I don't know why they would do that. But I just hope they don't pay anybody serious money. If they pay Duke Johnson $4 million here to play the third down role, then fine. But if they're going to pay somebody more than that, then I'm out.
That's what I'm saying. Like that's part of the reason I'm wondering about it, because how much are they going to pay? If they pay a running back a lot of money, that tells us they're done at wide receiver, right? If they pay Duke Johnson what you just mentioned, then okay, maybe these guys like Juju are still in play. That seems to be the one thing. Running back seems to be the one thing that they wanted, that we know they wanted, that they didn't get. And I wonder, again, whether it's Curtis Samuel or one of these receivers, or whether it's another corner, or whether it's trading Gilmore, I wonder how much is they're waiting on getting that running back, and they want to get that done before they start. Because running back clearly is part of the phase one plan of their offseason. If they were talking about it today, if they were talking to running backs today, it's part of phase one of their offseason. I'm wondering, does that get done? When does that need to get done so they can get on to phase two?
Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm surprised that it was, but I'm not surprised at the same time because for some reason Bill Belichick just like loves depth at that position. He wants like 7 running backs on the roster.
Guys get hurt. A lot of guys get hurt at that position. It's a physical position.
I just would want him to give some of that money to Curtis Samuel and just have him run routes out of the backfield on 3rd down every once in a while. Like, he's that type of guy. Jonnu's the type of guy, too, that you can line up in the backfield some.
So maybe that's it. So maybe that's it. Maybe they got, Jonnu, and then because I think the running back report was before they signed Jonnu. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, so just wrapping it up here, putting a bow on it. The Patriots sign, I think we're at 7 players that they signed today.
You want me to tell you? I'll tell you here. Hang on.
Guys that they signed out of obviously back and Dietrich Wise and Carl Davis, Jonnu Smith, Matthew Judon from the Ravens, Davon Godchaux coming up from Miami, Jalen Mills from the Eagles, Nelson Agholor, Kendrick Bourne, and now the last one of the night, Henry Anderson.
Last one for now.
I think the Patriots are done. I think they're done for this evening, but
I would have said that before
in free agency. I would have said that too.
Unexpected Bill Belichick recruiting the 2017 Eagles in Mills and Agholor.
There you go. Hey, listen.
So you know what they say: if you beat Belichick, right, he's going to want to sign you. So wait,
stop talking about Bill being too conservative and Bill not spending any money and Bill not having a plan. We can end all that, right? Like he clearly has a vision. Maybe it's not next year that he sees that vision coming together completely. Maybe it's 2 years from now. But he clearly has the vision. He clearly has the aggressive mentality to go out there and spend and get guys in here. And he has done that. Whether you love every signing or not, he's made signings. He's come out hot. He's come out aggressive. I mean, there's been like 20 players signed today, and 7 of them have gone to the Patriots, right? So it's
right.
Definitely uncharacteristically aggressive was 100% on. That's all we know at this point. But Alex and I are going to be back on the live stream. Same time, same place. Thank you very much for everybody out there that watched. All the comments, we see them, even the negative ones. We see those too. But we'll be back tomorrow at 7:30 to break down the next 24 hours in Patriots free agency. If it was anything like the first 12 that we just witnessed today, Alex and I might be a little bit more tired, but it's definitely going to be a lot of fun.
I'm still rolling.
And we'll be here.
Let it come. I'd rather this than nothing.
You don't have a 13-week-old puppy that you're also taking care of.
That's true. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. But man, to get a puppy during free agency was not necessarily one of my best moves. But we're going to continue to do this every single day this week. Hopefully the Patriots continue to make things interesting. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for listening and watching, everybody.